The summer of 1941 begins with the roar of engines and the absolute certainty of victory. For the German generals, this was not just another campaign. It was the final campaign. Operation Barbarossa was born shrouded in confidence, almost in contempt. On maps spread out on wooden tables, the Soviet Union appeared large but fragile. Lines advanced rapidly, arrows pointed east, and someone always repeated the same phrase: before winter, it will all be over. Soldiers cross the border believing this. They march under the hot sun, with dust rising from the fields, singing, laughing, certain that they will be home in a few months. Many carry photos of their families in their pockets. Some still wear uniforms that are too light, suitable for dry roads and long days. The atmosphere is one of hunting, not survival. The German war machine advances like thunder. Tanks smash through fences, infantry chase after them, planes cut through the sky. In the first battles, the enemy retreats, confused, disorganized. This only reinforces the illusion. Each village taken seems to prove that the generals were right. Each prisoner captured fuels the idea that the Soviet colossus is hollow inside. But while men look ahead, nobody looks at the sky. The sun is still blazing, it's true. The ground is still dry, but the days are gradually getting shorter. At night, the air cools down a little more than it should. A slight chill, almost imperceptible, ignored as an unimportant detail. In headquarters, the enemy is not the Red Army, it's time. And time is treated as something that can be defeated quickly. Trucks drive on overloaded, supply lines stretch like ropes about to snap, but no one breaks. To stop would mean admitting doubt, and doubt has no place when you believe you are writing history in a few weeks. The mistake originates there, not in a lost battle, nor in an ambush. Mistakes are born in absolute trust, based on the idea that war can be controlled by clocks and calendars, that nature obeys orders, that the Russian winter is just a word in old books, not a death sentence. Meanwhile, silent, patient, invisible, the cold weather is already on its way. Subscribe to the channel and explore the true stories of war, where history is written in blood, sacrifice, and survival. In the first few days, everything seems to work exactly as planned. The offensive advances at a speed that frightens even those carrying it out. Columns of tanks cut through dirt roads, raising clouds of dust that linger in the air for hours. Cities fall in a matter of days. Villages barely have time to understand what is happening before flags are changed. The reports arrive optimistically. Maps are updated with increasingly deeper lines into Soviet territory. Each kilometer gained reinforces the feeling that this war will not be long. The soldiers believe this because they need to believe. The alternative, to consider what happens if the war doesn't end quickly, is ignored. But behind the speed lies a silent wear and tear. Trucks break down, horses fall dead by the roadside, foam coming from their mouths, dust gets into lungs, eyes, and food. Men begin coughing up dried blood mixed with dirt. Boots, made for fast marches, are already starting to hurt their feet. The progress is too fast for the logistics themselves. Supply lines stretch like exposed veins. The further east the army rushes, the harder it becomes to feed it. Fuel arrives late. Ammunition needs to be rationed, but nobody wants to hear that. Every officer knows that slowing down now would be admitting that the plan isn't perfect. On the Soviet side, the scenario is different. It's not a clean retreat. It's a bloody one. Troops retreat, burning fields, destroying bridges, abandoning empty cities. Everything that could feed the enemy is left behind in ashes. The land begins to transform into a dead territory. German soldiers are traversing increasingly silent landscapes. Empty houses, poisoned, wells, burned barns. At night the wind is no longer warm. It cuts the skin, a strange cold for that time of year. Nothing alarming, yet. Even so, the maps continue to move forward. Arrows point to Moscow, Leningrad, Stalingrad. The commanders believe they are winning because they only look ahead. They don't see the trail of wear and tear behind them. They don't see that each kilometer gained costs more than the last. War still feels like a game of speed, but without anyone noticing, it begins to transform into something much worse, a race against one's own human body. Rasputitsa, the land that swallows armies. Without a single shot fired, the advance begins to falter. The first autumn rains fall, and within a few days what was once a road turns to mud. Not ordinary mud, it's a thick, sticky mass that sucks up boots, traps wheels, and won't let go. The soldiers soon learn a Russian word they'll never forget, Rasputitsa. Trucks get stuck up to their axles, tanks which once sped forward, like steel monsters, now skid uselessly. Men push vehicles with their feet sinking up to their shins. Some fall and can't get up without help. Mud gets into their clothes, sticks to their skin, and weighs tons. The rapid advance simply stops. Entire columns are stuck for days. Fuel runs out, stagnant in the tanks. Food doesn't arrive. Ammunition is left behind. Each kilometer gained comes to require hours, sometimes days, of miserable effort. The horses suffer first. Exhausted and bogged down, many break their legs trying to get out of the mud. They are slaughtered right there by the roadside, their blood mixing with the clay. The smell of dead flesh begins to follow the army. Men quickly learn that this animal was not just transportation, it was future food. The boots no longer dry. His feet are always wet. His skin cracks. Wounds get infected. Walking hurts. Stopping hurts even more. At night, the cold intensifies and the mud hardens a little, just enough to deceive. In the morning, he swallows it all again. Rasputitsa doesn't choose sides. Soviet soldiers also suffer, but they know that land. They know how to wait. They know how to retreat. For them, the mud is a silent ally. For the Germans, it is a trap with no way out. The cruelest thing is silence. There are no great battles. There is no glory. Only tired, dirty, hungry men trapped in an ocean of mud. Morale begins to drain away along with the mud. The confidence of summer already seems distant. And then, while everyone stares at the ground trying to break free, the sky is beginning to change. The rain gets colder, the wind cuts deeper, and the mud begins to harden. The white hell is forming. Winter arrives without warning and without forgiveness. Cold weather doesn't arrive with an announcement, it simply appears. One early morning, the soldiers wake up and realize that the water in their canteens has turned to ice. The ground is as hard as stone. The mud that yesterday swallowed men now holds everything together with iron teeth. Some even breathe a sigh of relief. Finally, they can walk. This relief is short-lived. The temperature drops too quickly. It's not an ordinary cold. It's a biting cold. The wind cuts through coats as if they didn't exist. The metal of weapons sticks to your fingers. Anyone who touches something without gloves feels their skin burn and then tear. The weapons are starting to malfunction. The oil freezes inside the bolts. Machine guns jam mid-fire. Rifles don't respond. A soldier pulls the trigger and nothing happens. He tries again, his hands trembling. The enemy doesn't need to shoot. The cold has already done the work. The uniforms don't help. Many still wear clothes made for the European summer. Thin coats, ill-fitting boots, gloves improvised from scraps of cloth. At night, men huddle together, trying to share the warmth like cornered animals. The body begins to give way. First come the numb toes, then the sharp pain, then nothing. Men wake up and realize they can't feel their feet. Some take off their boots and see the dark, hardened, dead skin. The cold doesn't bleed. It steals slowly. Sentinels die in silence. They are found in the morning, still standing, leaning on their rifles, eyes open, frozen in their place. They didn't scream, they didn't fight. They simply ceased to exist while the world slept. Every night turns into a battle, not against the enemy, but against one's own body. Sleeping is dangerous. Those who sleep too deeply may not wake up. Men pinch themselves, hit themselves, walk in circles just to stay alive. And the worst is yet to come, because along with the cold weather Food starts to become scarce, and when cold meets hunger, hell is complete. Subscribe for deep, uncompromising war documentaries that reveal the reality behind the battlefield. The cold has already conquered the environment. Now it's starting to conquer mankind. The human body wasn't made to withstand weeks of sub-zero temperatures, much less without sufficient food, rest, and shelter. On the Eastern Front, this becomes clear all too quickly. Those wounded by bullets are not the first to fall. They are the tired, the weak, those who have been still for too long. The blood begins to circulate more slowly. The fingers and toes become stiff, pale, then bluish. In a few hours, they become as black as coal. The pain is unbearable until it goes away. And when it disappears, it's because the tissue has died, healed. Doctors look, shake their heads, and know there's nothing to save. Without anesthesia, some men have fingers cut off right there with a knife or bayonet. Others prefer not to touch them and let the cold finish the job. The feet are the most punished. Wet boots, frozen socks, hours marching through hard snow. Soldiers feel as if they are walking on broken glass. Many keep walking anyway because stopping means dying. At night, when they take off their boots, they discover that their feet no longer respond. Some cry, others go into shock. There are men who try to warm their hands over weak flames and end up burning their own flesh without realizing it. The cold deceives the senses. It steals the pain before it steals life. The face also pays the price. Noses darken, ears fall off, skin cracks and bleeds, then freezes again. Beards become stiff as wire, covered in ice. Each breath hurts in the chest, as if the air were made of blades. The body craves rest, but war doesn't allow it. Sleeping too much is dangerous. Men who lie down for just a few minutes are found stiff hours later. The cold quickly kills those who let their guard down. And in the midst of all this, the cruelest fear emerges. The fear of one's own body failing before the battle. The soldier no longer fears only the enemy ahead. He fears waking up unable to feel his legs. He fears closing his eyes and never opening them again. He fears winter more than any army. And while the body rots in silence, my stomach starts to growl. Hunger becomes an invisible weapon. The food begins to disappear first from the plates, then from the thoughts. Rations dwindle without warning. A piece of stale bread needs to last all day. A can is divided among several men. Each bite is small, slow, almost ceremonial. Eating becomes an act of survival, not pleasure. The body, already weakened by the cold, collapses. Without calories, he cannot produce heat. The men tremble incessantly. Their teeth chatter day and night. Hunger doesn't just hurt in the stomach, it steals strength, concentration, and willpower. Soldiers begin to lose weight rapidly. Faces sink. Eyes become sunken, surrounded by dark shadows. Hands tremble as they try to grip the rifle. Some faint during the march and are unable to get up again. When the food runs out completely, morale breaks down. First, the men search for anything forgotten. Crumbs at the bottom of the backpack, leftover frozen feed, grains spilled on the ground. Then they look at the animals. Dead horses become food. The meat is tough, sometimes rotten, but it's edible. Some boil bones for hours to extract something resembling broth. Others chew on leather from saddles, belts, boots. The taste is awful, but it tricks the stomach for a few minutes. Hunger turns men into shadows. Conversations dwindle. Laughter disappears. Everything revolves around the next meal, even if there isn't one. Some start stealing from their own companions. Others trade cigarettes, medals, anything for a piece of bread. The cruelest thing is that hunger weakens even the will to fight. The starving soldier doesn't think about victory. He thinks about surviving the next hour. The cold hurts less when the body doesn't even have the energy to shiver. And while men dwindle, the enemy watches. The Red Army knows how to wait. It knows that time works in its favor. Every day without food is a bullet that doesn't need to be fired. On the Eastern Front, the war is no longer just about gunfire and explosions. It is made of empty stomachs, weak bodies, and frozen hopes. And soon, this weakness will exact an even higher price. Moscow. When progress dies in the snow, Moscow, the crown jewel of the Soviet Empire, loomed on the maps as the ultimate prize, the beating heart of a vast and unforgiving nation. For the invaders, capturing it was no mere tactical triumph. It was the coup de grace, the inevitable collapse of the Bolshevik leadership, the abrupt end of a war that had been promised like lightning, like a passing storm that would sweep across the East in weeks. They believed this with a blind faith, forged in the initial victories of June 1941, when armored columns cut through the Ukrainian plains like knives through melting butter, swallowing entire divisions of the Red Army in cauldrons of death and surrender. Millions of prisoners, cities ablaze, the endless horizon of the steppe bending to their inexorable advance. But Moscow was no ordinary city. It was a symbol, a bastion erected upon centuries of resistance, where Tsars and revolutionaries had defied invaders before, from Napoleon to the Tatars, and where the Russian winter, that eternal guardian, awaited to claim its vengeance. The autumn of 1941 was already whispering warnings, but the commanders, intoxicated by success, ignored them. Operation Typhoon, launched in October, aimed to engulf the capital in a deadly embrace, with armies converging from north and south, promising Stalin's downfall. Before Christmas, the German troops, exhausted but still driven by the euphoria of their conquests, marched with the weight of a campaign that had already claimed hundreds of thousands. Their uniforms, suitable for European summers, began to betray their inadequacy, as the rains transformed roads into muddy swamps, bogging down tanks and trucks in a sticky, seemingly living sludge, sucking away wheels and souls. The soldiers, many of them young recruits, plucked from Bavarian farms or the streets of Berlin, dreamed of glory, but exhaustion was already consuming them. Every kilometer cost more. Supplies were scarce, logistics were stretched to the limit, with supply lines extending for thousands of kilometers, vulnerable to partisans who emerged from the forests like vengeful ghosts. Then came the snow, not like a gentle veil, but like an avalanche of despair. November brought the first flakes, light at first, dancing in the air like promises of winter beauty, but soon accumulating in treacherous layers that swallowed the world in an oppressive white. Temperatures plummeted beyond imagination, 20 degrees then, 30, and on dark nights plunging to 40, where the air crystallized into needles that pierced lungs and froze tears in the eyes. Men staggered forward, their worn-out boots leaving bloody footprints in the icy crust. Torn clothes, patched with rags, looted from devastated villages, offered little defense against the Siberian wind that howled like a hungry wolf, penetrating bones and stealing vital warmth. Bodies, once robust, were now thin and bent with hunger, rations reduced to stale bread and watery soup when there was anything to eat. Horses, the faithful companions of the artillery, succumbed first, freezing on their feet or being slaughtered for raw meat that the soldiers devoured with trembling hands, the blood freezing on their mustaches. The vehicles, the pride of the blitzkrieg, groaned and failed. Panzer tanks, invincible in summer now, immobilized by lubricants that hardened like stone, engines that coughed and died in the relentless cold. Many were abandoned by the roadside, ghostly silhouettes covered in ice, silent monuments to human pride. The silence of the landscape was terrifying. Snow covered everything, once busy roads, barren fields, corpses of fallen comrades that no one had the strength to bury. The wind broke the void with its eternal lament, mixed with the distant crackle of Soviet artillery, a constant reminder that the enemy was not defeated, but lurking. Breathing hurt, each inhalation a blade of ice cutting the throat. Sweat, treacherous, froze instantly inside clothing, transforming layers into rigid armor that rubbed the skin until it bled. And then the counterattack erupted like a primal fury. On December 5th, 1941, the Red Army, commanded by the shrewd General Zhukov, launched its winter offensive. Siberian troops, fresh and hardened by the climate they knew as an old ally, emerged from the snowy shadows. Dressed in white padded coats, felt-lined boots, and equipped with skis that made them glide through the snow like specters, they moved with supernatural speed. For them, winter was not a scourge, but a sharp weapon, forged in centuries of survival in the tundra. Entire divisions transferred from the Far East after neutrality with Japan was secured, attacked with T-34 tanks that purred in the cold, cannons that fired without fail, and a determination fueled by hatred for the invaders, who had burned their villages and massacred their families. The German lines, stretched and fragile, crumbled like torn paper. Weapons failed at crucial moments. Frozen rifles, machine guns jammed by ice buildup in their mechanisms. Men tried to pull triggers with numb fingers, many already black with gangrene, unable to feel the cold metal. Hunger robbed them of muscle strength. The cold devoured their mental agility. Slow reactions turned battles into one-sided massacres. The advance, once unstoppable, simply stopped like a river freezing in mid-flow. A few kilometers from Moscow, so close that some swore they could see the Kremlin towers in the distance through the snowstorm, the truth imposed itself with the brutality of a hammer. There were no more reserves, no fuel, no hope. The army that had crossed borders with confidence now fought not for victory, but for mere survival, retreating in disorganized panic as the Soviets pursued them, mowing down entire regiments in the virgin snow. Panic spread not like a noisy wildfire, but like a silent frost seeping into souls. It was a deep, primal fear, the recognition that the divine plan had failed, that the Russian winter, that merciless leviathan, could not be conquered. It conquered. Soldiers whispered forgotten prayers, looked to the grey sky for salvation, but found only more snow falling, inexorably. The order to stop, issued by Hitler amidst his distant fury, sounded like a veiled defeat, a tacit acknowledgement that the Blitzkrieg had been swallowed by the white abyss. Men dug positions in the hardened snow, using shovels that slipped in numb hands or fingernails that broke like glass. The trenches were pathetic, shallow pits that barely offered shelter from the biting wind or enemy projectiles. Each night was an ordeal of survival, with sentries freezing in their posts, eyes fixed on the horizon where the enemy approached. Moscow remained untouched, its distant lights mocking the invaders. In that frigid moment, even if few dared admit it aloud, everyone knew deep in their terrified hearts. The Blitzkrieg had died there, in the merciless snow, and with it, the illusions of a swift victory. What remained was a winter of horrors where the true enemy was not the Soviet, but the cold that devoured everything, turning heroes into frozen ghosts. Soldiers freeze in their own trenches. Without advance toward glory and without retreat toward salvation, men were condemned to remain anchored to that frozen land, like ships stranded in a sea of ice. To remain meant to resist, but resistance in the Russian winter was a cruel illusion, a slow death sentence disguised as duty. Commanders, distant in their barracks warmed by stolen fires, ordered, "Hold positions." But for the soldiers on the front line, this was digging their own graves. Digging in the Russian soil of December was not excavating soft earth. It was battling against a crust of permafrost, hardened as granite, where shovels struck, and produced blue sparks in the icy air, returning with tiny chips. Many abandoned their tools, using bare hands or bayonets to scrape the ground, even knowing that direct contact with the cold would cost fingers. First, excruciating pain, then numbness, and finally the black gangrene that spread like a biblical plague. Thousands perished in this way. Frostbite tore away limbs, turning warriors into mutilated beings begging for evacuation that never came. The trenches, when finally formed, were pathetic abominations. Shallow ditches half a meter wide, barely sufficient to protect from the wind that howled like a possessive demon. penetrating every crack and sucking the residual heat from huddled bodies. The ground froze beneath, a mattress of ice radiating cold upwards, while the air above condensed into crystals that accumulated like deadly dust. The soldier was trapped between two icy hells, his body a battlefield where vital heat fought a losing war. At night, the wind entered the trenches like invisible blades, cutting exposed flesh, freezing sweat on brows, and turning breaths into ephemeral clouds that hovered like departing souls. There were no safe campfires. Fire attracted Soviet snipers, and firewood was scarce, forcing men to burn the uniforms of fallen comrades, or even pages from personal diaries, where dreams of home dissipated in thin smoke. Sleep, that subtle traitor, became a deadly enemy, more lethal than any bullet. Exhausted men leaned against the uneven walls of the trench, only to close their eyes for an instant, and many never opened them again. In the morning, they were found rigid as ice statues, covered by a thin layer of fresh snow, still clutching their frozen rifles in petrified fists. There were no screams in the freezing. It killed in absolute silence, a gradual embrace that began in the peripheral limbs, numb fingers, then legs heavy as lead, and rose to the core, stopping the heart in an inaudible whisper. A man could be conversing at night, sharing memories of a sunny farm or a distant bride, and hours later be dead beside his companion, without anyone noticing the exact moment when life ebbed away, leaving only an empty cocoon, open eyes staring into nothingness with frozen terror. The bodies began to pile up, like discarded firewood, a morbid testament to the unseen carnage. Burying them was impossible. The earth, hard as steel, rejected any attempt, and shovels broke in vain. Many remained there, heaped at the edges of the trenches, hastily covered with snow to mask the horror. Others, in an act of desperate usefulness, were used as makeshift barriers against the biting wind or enemy fire, walls of frozen flesh where bullets ricocheted with a hollow sound, echoing the emptiness of lost humanity. In that hell, even the dead continued to serve the war, their faces rigid in expressions of eternal agony, reminding the living of the fate that awaited them. The smell was a unique sensory assault, not the damp stench of tropical decay, but a dry, metallic odor, impregnated with gunpowder smoke and the biting coolness of ice. Putrefaction progressed slowly in the cold, but when rare rays of sunlight penetrated the blizzard for a few hours, the horror revealed itself in all its macabre glory. Pale skin cracking like porcelain, fluids frozen in pink crystals, worms hibernating, awaiting the thaw. The psyche, already weakened by the endless campaign, began to shatter like ice under pressure. Men talked to themselves, murmuring to invisible shadows, reliving past battles or begging forgiveness from distant mothers. Some burst into hysterical laughter for no reason, a dissonant sound in the oppressive silence, while others plunged into profound muteness, entire days without a word, empty eyes reflecting the inner abyss. The fear evolved, no longer the sudden terror of battle, but the insidious dread of slowly freezing, awake and conscious, feeling the body shut down part by part. First, the feet, then the hands, the torso, until the heart beat its last solitary note. The trenches, conceived as shelters, transformed into icy prisons, torture chambers where each day stole more, physical strength drained by starvation, hope evaporated by news of Soviet counterattacks surrounding entire divisions, humanity corroded by the need to survive at any cost, stealing boots from dead comrades, eating contaminated snow, or even considering the unthinkable in moments of ravenous madness. And while the soldiers froze where they were, the High Command, isolated in heated bunkers, insisted on resisting, issuing orders that echoed like cruel jokes. Hold the line! But the line was an illusion, a border blurred by snow where death respected no flags. The next stage of this hell would be even worse, an escalation of terror where cold and hunger combined with death that surrounded them on all sides. Partisans ambushing supplies, Soviet artillery hammering positions, and the specter of total encirclement, as in Stalingrad that would come later, but here on the gates of Moscow, the prelude to a nightmare that would last for years. The men, reduced to shadows of themselves, knew deep in their terrified souls that winter was not just a season. It was the merciless judge of their hubris, condemning them to a white purgatory where despair reigned supreme and terror intertwined with each falling snowflake, inexorable and eternal. Stalingrad, hell within hell. If the Eastern Front was already a vast and merciless hell, a cauldron of mud, snow and fire where entire nations dissolved in carnage, Stalingrad emerged as its burning, paradoxically frozen core. A vortex of agony where human suffering reached abyssal depths, transcending mere war to become an existential ordeal. It was not just a city on the map, a strategic point on the banks of the Volga. Stalingrad, renamed in honor of the Soviet dictator, became an eternal symbol of resistance and ruin, a name that would echo through generations as synonymous with utter despair. For the Germans, capturing it was imperative. Controlling the Volga would cut Soviet supply lines, isolating the Caucasus and its oil fields, and above all, humiliate Stalin personally, breaking the spirit of a people who had already lost millions. But for the Soviets, defending Stalingrad was defending the soul of the nation. Not one step back, commanded Stalin's Order 227, transforming every street into a trench, every building into a fortress, and every civilian into a potential martyr. The battle, which dragged on from August 1942 to February 1943, would consume nearly 2 million lives, leaving an indelible scar on human history, where heroism intertwined with horror in a macabre dance under grey, snowy skies. The city, once a bustling industrial metropolis with tractor factories and steel mills, was transforming into a labyrinth of apocalyptic destruction. Streets that were once bustling were now veins clogged with rubble, buildings split in two by bombs, their crumbling facades revealing exposed interiors like open wounds, where staircases hung precariously and corridors became galleries of shadows. Factories like Tratonaya and Barricadi, giants of reinforced concrete, had become makeshift fortresses, their halls echoing with the roar of machine guns and the shattering of grenades. Everything was covered by a perennial layer of dirty snow, mixed with ashes from incessant fires and frozen blood that formed hardened red puddles, as if the ground itself were bleeding. The air carried the acrid stench of gunpowder, burnt flesh and decay, a miasma that seeped into the lungs and soul, reminding with every breath that death was omnipresent. German soldiers of the Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, advanced with the initial arrogance of conquerors, but soon discovered that Stalingrad did not surrender. It devoured. The fighting there wasn't measured in kilometers of conquered territory, as on the vast summer plains, but in agonizing meters, on creaking staircases where men faced each other with gleaming bayonets, in narrow corridors illuminated only by the glare of explosions, in damp, dark basements where the enemy materialized a few steps away, close enough to see the terror in the other's eyes before plunging the blade in. Each house, each apartment, changed hands several times a day. In the morning, flags with the swastika fluttered in broken windows, proclaiming German victory. In the afternoon, Soviet counterattacks, led by units like Chuykov's 62nd Division, recaptured the space with grenades and flames, leaving the ground littered with mutilated bodies. At night, the building belonged to the Soviets, but at the next dawn, everything was in ruins, a skeleton of bricks and twisted iron filled with bloated corpses, where hungry rats feasted under the empty gaze of the survivors. Snipers, like the legendary Vasily Zaitsev, turned windows into death traps, taking down enemies with surgical precision. while assault groups infiltrated frozen sewers, emerging like demons from the depths to silently reap lives. The noise was constant. The thunder of artillery, the crackle of rifles, the guttural cries of pain and fury, mixed with the lament of the winter wind that swept through the streets like a harbinger of doom. And then came the encirclement, the masterstroke that would seal the fate of hundreds of thousands. In November 1942, Operation Uranus, orchestrated by Soviet generals Zhukov and Vasilevsky, closed the ring around the German 6th Army and its Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian allies. More than 300,000 men trapped in a cauldron of snow and fire, with no way out, no possible retreat. The shock was immediate, visceral. German sentries, freezing in advanced posts, sighted Soviet columns converging like a red avalanche, T-34 tanks roaring across the frozen steppe, Siberian infantry advancing on skis and in white coats that camouflaged them against the white landscape. The already cruel winter closed in, along with the enemy, transforming the Volga into an insurmountable ice barrier, while Soviet artillery hammered German positions day and night, an incessant bombardment that shook the earth and nerves. Within the dead city, the once invincible German army was now a cornered animal, surrounded by an endless sea of snow and the distant roar of cannons promising annihilation. Hitler, in his delirious madness, ordered Stalingrad must be held at all costs, transforming the siege into a collective death sentence, where loyalty to the Führer became synonymous with suicide. Hunger reached a new level of horror, a scourge that corroded body and mind with torturous slowness. There were no more horses to slaughter. The last ones had been devoured weeks before, their carcasses cleaned to the bone, the raw meat chewed with teeth grinding from the cold. Rations, already scarce, evaporated. The promised air, supplied by the Luftwaffe under Göring, failed miserably, with Juncker's planes battling blizzards and Soviet fighters delivering meager fragments of what was needed, perhaps 100 tons a day, when 700 were vital. Soldiers ate anything that wasn't wood or metal. Rats hunted in the rubble with bayonets, their fibrous flesh cooked in makeshift fires of broken furniture. Boot leather boiled until softened, chewed like rubber. Dirty, melted snow clung to helmets to quell thirst, often contaminated with motor oil or blood, causing dysentery that emptied their bowels in agony. Men divided crumbs like sacred treasures, counting grains of stale bread, hungry eyes watching every bite. Cannibalism whispered in the dark corners, tales of bodies disappearing, limbs secretly severed, a taboo broken by hunger that transformed brothers in arms into predators. Empty stomachs roared like an internal beast, devouring life force, leaving soldiers like walking skeletons, skin stretched over bones, eyes sunken, in dark sockets, reflecting a despair that transcended humanity. The cold inside the city was even worse, a torment amplified by the urban destruction that denied any refuge. Without intact walls, without roofs to block the wind, the icy air pierced everything like invisible blades, penetrating torn uniforms and weakened bodies. Temperatures plummeted to 30 degrees, 40 on merciless nights, where the air crystallized into needles that cut off breath. At night, soldiers buried themselves in basements filled with ice and rubble, huddled together like animals to share the scarce body heat. But many awoke with dead comrades beside them, rigid, motionless as marble statues, eyes wide open staring into the void with frozen terror, victims of hypothermia that killed silently, shutting down the body organ by organ. Frostbite reaped limbs, fingers blackened with gangrene, amputated with knives without anesthesia, leaving bloody stumps that quickly became infected. The wind howled through, the ruins like an eternal lament, carrying snowflakes that piled up in layers, turning trenches into white tombs where men trembled uncontrollably, teeth chattering in rhythms of despair. Ammunition ran out, transforming the war into primal chaos. Weapons failed in the cold, Rifles froze, grenades that wouldn't detonate, machine guns jammed with accumulated ice. Some fought with rusty knives, bent shovels used as axes, pieces of iron torn from wreckage. The combat became personal, brutal, animalistic. Bodies colliding in dark basements, hands tightening around throats, teeth digging into flesh in primal fury. There was no room for pity. Prisoners were rare, often executed on the spot, their deaths a momentary relief for the exhausted victor. The smell of fresh blood mingled with the stench of excrement and decay, a foul air that suffocated the senses. Diseases spread like biblical plagues, exploiting bodies weakened by hunger and cold. Typhus, carried by lice infesting filthy. Uniforms caused delirious fevers, hallucinations where men relived past horrors. Dysentery turned entrails into liquid fire, forcing painful evacuations in the snow, leaving trails of filth. Pneumonia attacked already weakened lungs. Hoarse coughs echoing like death sentences. Wounds did not heal. A small cut, a splinter turned into gangrenous infection. A slow death sentence. Doctors, exhausted and without supplies, operated in basements lit by flickering candles, hands trembling with cold. Without anesthesia, cries echoed in the frozen depths, mingling with the groans of the dying, a chorus of agony that haunted the survivors. The psyche shattered into irreparable fragments, a slow collapse devouring the mind like cold devouring the body. Some men simply sat in dark corners, refusing to rise, empty eyes lost in an inner abyss, awaiting death like a long-awaited lover. Others walked in circles, murmuring the names of wives, children, distant mothers, broken voices echoing in empty ruins. The brain failed. Hallucinations danced in the shadows, ghosts of fallen comrades whispering accusations. Paranoia set in, with soldiers distrusting allies, fearing betrayal in every glance. The fear was no longer of the enemy bullet, but of the inner void, of losing oneself amidst the chaos. Suicides increased, revolvers pressed against temples, grenades pulled in solitary embraces, a final escape from unbearable torment. Stalingrad didn't kill quickly, like a decisive battle. It crushed, slowly, day after day, week after week, month after month, eroding the will to live until the idea of victory evaporated like smoke in the icy wind. The soldier no longer dreamed of glory or a return to his homeland. He longed only for the end of the hunger that gnawed at his insides, for the cessation of the cold that penetrated his bones, for a moment of peace in a world of eternal suffering. The city, a smoldering skeleton, became a living prison where each dawn brought more horror, more loss, more despair. And when surrender finally came, on February 2nd, 1943, with Paulus capitulating after Hitler promoted him to field marshal in the vain hope of inspiring suicide, there was no true relief. Of the 91,000 German survivors, gaunt ghosts with haunted eyes, marching to Soviet prisoner of war camps under incessant snow, only 6,000 would return years later, forever scarred. Because those who emerged alive from Stalingrad did not emerge whole. Mutilated bodies, fractured minds, shattered souls in a hell that would echo in eternal nightmares. A living testament to the fact that war, in its rawest form, devoured not only lives but the essence of humanity, leaving only empty shells wandering in an irreparably broken world. The cold decides who lives and who dies after Stalingrad, the cataclysm that swallowed an entire army in its icy ruins, no doubt remained hanging in the frigid air of the Eastern Front. Winter was not merely a backdrop to human carnage, a fleeting, climatic whim that could be ignored with determination or engineering. No, it stood as the supreme judge, merciless and unappealable, of the most brutal war the world had ever witnessed. No matter the number of divisions marked on strategic maps, the panzer tanks lined up in ghostly columns on the frozen tracks, or the furious orders emanating from the heated bunkers of Berlin or the Wolfschanze, those who could not withstand the deadly embrace of the cold simply vanished, evaporating into the white vastness, as if they had never existed, leaving only a rigid silhouette to be covered by the incessant snow. The Russian winter, that primordial leviathan forged in the bowels of Siberia, dictated the fate of entire nations with cosmic indifference, reaping lives not with bullets or bombs, but with the slow and inexorable theft of vital warmth, transforming heroes into ice statues and empires into shattered mirages. The Red Army, forged in the furnaces of revolution and tempered by the harsh realities of a land that never forgave the weak, understood this better than any invader could dream. Its soldiers, peasants torn from the endless steppes, factory workers from Magnitogorsk or shepherds from the Mongolian tundra also suffered the scourge of winter. Oh, how they suffered! They bled in muddy trenches that froze into solid traps, starved when supply lines stretched beyond human limits, shivered under quilted coats patched with rags of enemy uniforms. But for them, the cold was not an alien intruder, an unpredictable curse descending from the heavens like a biblical plague. It was a childhood companion, a constant presence in the long nights of isolated villages where hearths crackled weakly against the howling wind. They knew instinctively how to move through deep snow, using makeshift skis of split wood or felt-lined Valenki boots that insulated their feet from the treacherous ice. They knew how to protect themselves from the biting wind, digging holes in the snow to form primitive igloos that retained body heat like survival cocoons. And above all, they knew how to wait for the moment when the enemy, exhausted and numb, would falter, transforming patience into a weapon more lethal than any Katyusha cannon. For the Soviets, winter was no surprise. It was a cruel routine, a familiar dance with death they had rehearsed since birth, allowing them to advance when others succumbed. Each frigid night, a veil of darkness stretching for endless hours beneath starless skies, weakened the enemy with surgical precision, like an invisible predator attacking its most vulnerable prey. Temperatures plummeted to unimaginable abysses, 40 degrees, 50 in Siberian slugs that seemed to defy the laws of physics, where the air solidified into sharp crystals that cut the throat with every shallow breath. German soldiers, many of them young conscripts from the temperate climates of the Rhineland or East Prussia, huddled in makeshift shelters, shallow, holes in the hardened ground, covered by tattered tarpaulins that fluttered like flags of surrender. Sleep, when it came, was a traitor. Men fell asleep, leaning against petrified trees, still clutching rusty helmets or frozen rifles, and awoke, or not, like rigid corpses, their bodies preserved in grotesque poses by the frost, eyes glazed with eternal horror. Each morning revealed a panorama of terror, bodies scattered across the white landscape like storm debris, some fallen in desperate attempts to retreat, legs sunk into the snow up to their knees, faces contorted in silent screams. Others sat in positions of eternal rest, as if they had simply decided to stop, their hearts paralyzed by the cold that seeped in like slow poison. Winter chose its victims without haste, without favoritism, the high-ranking officer as much as the illiterate recruit, transforming battlefields into silent cemeteries where the wind whispered forgotten epitaphs. The German offensives, once launched with the fury of a blitzkrieg that had swept across Western Europe in weeks, were losing momentum under the relentless yoke of the ice. Even when orders came from above, advance, attack, conquer, many simply could not obey, their bodies betrayed by a weakness that transcended willpower. Legs, numb from hypothermia, refused to respond, sinking into the snow like lead anchors. Arms, heavy with hunger and cold, barely lifted weapons that seemed like blocks of ice in numb hands. The brain, slow and confused. Under the veil of malnutrition, rations reduced to watery soup of melted snow and frozen roots struggled to process commands, transforming elaborate tactics into uncoordinated movements, like puppets with cut strings. A soldier might want to fight, inflamed by the distant fire of ideology or by the fear of being shot for cowardice, but the body would not obey, succumbing to a torpor that extinguished the inner flame, leaving him exposed to Soviet counterattacks that emerged like ghosts in a blizzard. Battles like Kursk in the summer of 1943 were preludes, but the subsequent winters, 1943 to 1944, with Operation Barbarossa that would crush Army Group Center, revealed the truth. The cold had turned the tide, weakening the German lines to the point of making them as fragile as cracked glass. The cold also killed hope, that fragile beacon that sustained souls amidst the chaos. When temperatures dropped, morale plummeted along with them, a collective collapse that spread like an invisible epidemic. Men no longer spoke of glorious victory, of marching on Moscow or returning as decorated heroes. They whispered in hoarse and trembling voices about surviving the day that dragged on, about finding shelter for a few hours in an abandoned cabin whose walls creaked under the weight of the frost, about not sleeping so as not to freeze to death in a treacherous dream. Despair settled in deeply, a void that corroded the spirit. Letters from home, yellowed and frozen in pockets, lost their meaning when reality was a white purgatory, where each snowflake seemed like a grain of sand in an inexorable hourglass. Some slowly went mad, murmuring prayers to indifferent gods or hallucinating visions of warm bonfires in the middle of the tundra. Others opted for a voluntary end, pressing cold pipes against their temples, a final crack echoing in the silence like a merciful release from torment. For the Soviets, every degree below zero was a tactical advantage, an invisible ally that multiplied their resilience. They advanced when the enemy was weakest, emerging from snowy forests in white camouflage coats, moving like wolves in a pack, attacking German positions where the cold had already done half the work, sentrymen frozen in their posts, machine guns jammed by ice, tanks immobilized by solidified fuel. Many battles were won before the first shot was fired. Winter undermined enemy morale, spread diseases like typhus and pneumonia in poorly protected camps, and isolated units with blizzards that blocked roads, turning reinforcements into distant mirages. The Soviets, hardened by years of forced collectivization and purges that had selected the most resilient, exploited this masterfully. Partisans emerging from the shadows to sabotage supply lines, Siberian divisions marching tirelessly while the Germans stumbled over ill-fitting boots. The Eastern Front, that vast theater of horrors stretching from Leningrad to the Caucasus, was transformed into a brutal, natural selection, a warlike Darwinism where survival did not reward the fastest or the best armed, but the one who could endure the longest, the triple scourge of cold, hunger, and fear. It was not the brilliant tactics of generals in heated rooms that decided. It was the ability to resist the wind that howled like tormented souls, the hunger that gnawed at the insides like a living parasite, the fear that took root in the chest like icy roots, whispering that the end was inevitable. The Germans, with their superior technology and doctrine of mobile warfare, discovered the hard way that machines failed in the ice, while the human spirit, molded by the Russian soil, endured. Countless divisions evaporated thus, not in epic battles but in forgotten nights where the thermometer plummeted and bodies simply stopped fighting. And so, silently, without fanfare or proclamations, winter began to decide the course of the war. Not with fiery speeches in crowded squares, not with flags waving in triumphant winds, but with bodies abandoned in the snow, mute monuments to shattered human pride. Each rigid corpse, covered by a white shroud, was a verdict. The empire that had dared to challenge the East had found its nemesis not in rival armies, but in the elemental force that had governed those lands since time immemorial. The terror perpetuated itself. A cycle of despair where the rising sun revealed only more infinite white, more loss, more emptiness, until the very concept of victory dissolved into the icy air, leaving only the primal struggle for the next breath, for the next day, in a hell where the cold reigned absolute and eternal. Diseases, delusions, and mental collapse. When the body is already broken, it is the mind that begins to give way. On the Eastern Front, disease doesn't arrive as an isolated event. It spreads like a slow, inevitable fog. Weak, hungry, frozen men huddled together in makeshift shelters. It's the perfect breeding ground for disaster. Typhus appears first. Then comes dysentery, pneumonia, infections that never heal. A simple cut becomes an open, black, swollen wound. There aren't enough antibiotics. There's no rest. Many keep marching until they collapse. The fever mixes reality and nightmare. Soldiers are delirious in the middle of the night. They call for their mothers, for their wives, for someone who isn't there. Some get up and walk out of the shelter, believing they see a house, a fire burning, a warm place. They are found, frozen hours later. The cold starts to trick the brain. There are men who, shortly before dying, feel an intense heat. They tear off their clothes, throw away their coats, believing they are burning. It's the body's last trick before the end. The snow covers everything soon after. The psychological breakdown occurs in silence. Some soldiers stop talking completely. They stare blankly into space, don't respond to orders, don't react to gunfire. Others laugh for no reason, guffaw during bombings, as if something inside them has broken. Discipline disappears, not out of cowardice, but out of utter exhaustion. A sick, hungry and frozen man doesn't think about duty. He thinks about stopping the pain, about ending it somehow. Field doctors are working at the limit of what's impossible. They operate without adequate light, with trembling hands and frozen instruments. Amputations are performed without sufficient anesthesia. Shouts echo in the shelters, mixed with the wind and distant artillery. The cruelest thing is realizing that so many are still alive, but they're not there anymore. The body moves, the rifle is in the hands, but the mind has already been left behind, lost in the snow. On the Eastern Front, the war doesn't just kill soldiers. She destroys men from the inside, little by little, until there's almost nothing left but a walking uniform. And when an army starts to lose its mind, it's very close to falling apart completely. The German army begins to break down. There isn't an exact moment when everything falls apart. The German army doesn't break with a cry, nor with a clear defeat. It gradually falls apart, like a body that slowly loses blood until it collapses. Entire units cease to exist on paper even before disappearing on the battlefield. Companies reduced to dozens of men, platoons commanded by soldiers who should never have been in command, officers dead, frozen, or simply absent, taken by illness or exhaustion. The orders keep coming. Advance. Hold position. Resist. But those words no longer carry weight. The soldier looks at the white horizon and knows he doesn't have the strength to accomplish any of it. It's not disobedience, it's physical incapacity. Communication fails, cables freeze, radios don't work, messengers don't return. The battlefield becomes a collection of isolated pockets, each fighting its own private war against cold and hunger. The equipment becomes scrap metal. Abandoned vehicles pile up along the roads. Tanks without fuel, cannons without ammunition, frozen trucks with bodies inside. The mighty war machine is now a snow-covered steel graveyard. Morale has plummeted to rock bottom. There are no more inspiring speeches, no more promises of victory. What remains are empty faces, frozen beards, eyes that no longer shine. Men who fight only because they are still alive. Some try to escape. Others simply sit and wait. There are soldiers who drop their rifles, not out of cowardice, but because they no longer have the strength even to hold them. Their bodies don't respond. Their minds are exhausted. The enemy notices. The Red Army senses the exact moment when the enemy begins to truly give way. Attacks become more frequent, more daring. Winter continues to help, weakening those already on the verge of collapse. The idea of a quick, clean, controlled war is dead. What exists now is a desperate struggle to maintain some cohesion, some dignity, some chance of survival. And then comes the most dreaded order of all, retreat. But to retreat into that white hell, it's almost as deadly as moving forward. The retreat under snowstorm and blood retreating is not an organized maneuver. It's a slow, painful escape made with broken bodies and almost no hope. When the order arrives, many already know not everyone will be able to leave. The roads are covered in snow and ice. The wind cuts the face like a knife. Each step requires an absurd effort. Men march hunched over, carrying the wounded on their backs, dragging companions who can no longer walk. Those who fall rarely get up. Abandoned vehicles mark the path. Frozen trucks with bodies inside. Fuel tanks without fuel, covered in ice. Cannons abandoned by the roadside, useless. The army leaves behind everything it cannot carry, including people. The wounded suffer the most. No transport, no morphine, no shelter. Many are left in destroyed houses, burned barns, shallow ditches in the snow. Some ask to be taken. Others ask to be killed. Most remain silent, knowing what comes next. Soviet artillery gives no respite. Explosions erupt amidst the retreating columns. Shrapnel cuts through already weakened bodies. Men throw themselves onto the icy ground, trying to hide behind nothing. The snow is stained red, then freezes again. At night, the cold finishes the job. Without campfires which would give away their position, the soldiers huddle together. Many don't wake up. In the morning, the survivors move on, leaving behind stiff bodies lined up like ice statues. The silence is overwhelming. There are no shouts of victory, no speeches. Only the sound of footsteps in the snow, heavy breathing, and the wind. The retreat seems endless. Every kilometer gained back costs lives. The worst part is the feeling of abandonment. Men realize they are no longer part of a grand strategy. They are merely survivors trying to escape the white hell. The war has lost any semblance of glory. And as the column drags itself westward, winter continues to advance from the east. Why not front oriental? No one runs from the cold. They just try to stay alive for another day. The Eastern Front becomes a meat grinder. After retirement, no one talks about exceptions or bad luck anymore. It is clear to everyone the Eastern Front is unlike anything else. This is no ordinary battlefront. It's a machine that relentlessly consumes men on both sides, day after day, winter after winter. The battles continue without rest. Kharkov, Kursk, Leningrad, hundreds of nameless villages. Always the same scene, snow, mud, blood. The terrain changes little, but the bodies pile up. The ground becomes so saturated with death that it seems never to return to normal. New troops arrive filled with fear. Young men, some almost boys, sent to replace those who disappeared. They hear stories, see the empty faces of the veterans, and quickly understand there are no heroes there, only a temporary survivor. Winter returns every year, and with it the same ritual of suffering. Inadequate uniforms, insufficient supplies, cold that paralyzes machines and people. No matter how many lessons have been learned, the weather always demands more than expected. The Soviets also paid a brutal price. Millions die, they freeze, they bleed. Victory does not come easily. Every advance costs rivers of blood. But the Red Army accepts the sacrifice because it knows that retreat means disappearing. The Eastern Front does not allow breaks. There is no safe route. There is no real rest. Even far from the front lines, the cold and hunger continue to kill. Hospitals are overflowing. Trains are full of wounded who will never fight again, if they ever walk again. The landscape transforms into a continuous cemetery. Bodies buried hastily, others never buried. Makeshift crosses, helmets marking where someone fell. When the snow melts, the dead reappear, reminding everyone that this land is soaked in blood. The war there leaves deep scars. In the bodies, mutilated and frozen. In the mind, broken and silent. And in history, it serves as a terrifying warning of what happens when men believe they can dominate everything, even nature. On the Eastern Front, the war does not end when the battle is over. It continues, slowly, steadily, relentlessly, and in the end, when the cannons finally fall silent, what remains is not victory, it's memory. When the war finally ends, the silence does not bring immediate relief. It weighs heavily. It echoes. Because on the Eastern Front, the end of the fighting does not erase what was experienced. The snow melts, the earth reappears, and with it, the bodies that were never buried. Millions died there, not just in grand offensives or famous battles, but slowly, frozen in guard posts, starved to death in trenches, abandoned on roads during endless retreats. The cold killed as many as bullets and bombs, perhaps more. The survivors bear scars that don't appear on medals, missing fingers, amputated feet, destroyed lungs. But the worst is inside. Many can never sleep again without hearing the wind. They never feel cold the same way again. For them, winter has ceased to be a season. It has become an eternal enemy. The Eastern Front changes the very idea of war. He proves that strategy, technology, and courage are not enough when nature decides to fight. The Russian winter doesn't choose sides, but it exacts a brutal price from those who underestimate it. Generals return home. Maps are stored. Speeches are written. But ordinary men, the soldiers, are left behind in history, frozen in time, remembered only by crooked crosses, names on lists, and fragmented memories. The White Hell teaches a simple and cruel truth. In war, sometimes the greatest killer doesn't wear a uniform. It blows like the wind, it falls like snow, and wait patiently until the human body can't take it anymore. And so, in Eastern Europe, amidst frozen fields and destroyed cities, the cold wrote its own story. A story made of silence, hunger, and death. The Eastern Front was not merely a succession of battles, it was an extreme test of human limits. In the White Hell, men fell not only from gunfire, but from cold, hunger, and neglect. Entire armies were broken not by a single blow, but by the relentless attrition of a winter that forgives no mistakes. When the war ended, it was clear that nature was as lethal there as any armed enemy. And the lesson remains. In war, overconfidence can kill as much as a bullet.